That's nice. So, and she's kind of it's so innocent. Yes, and then, yeah.
Okay, hello. Not a little girly.
Okay, let's try a couple more. Yeah. But I think we're getting there. Maybe a little smile, like a little, like someone's told you a secret, and you're like, oh, you're keeping the secret. Yeah, there. Yes, that's very nice, the orange. I've made work about women, and the thing that I'm interested in making work about women is that I feel that the idea of femininity and what femininity is a construct based on capitalistic structures and the consumer industry. So I'm interested in making work that questions how women view themselves and whether the views they have of themselves are constructed by someone else rather than themselves. So I make work that is predominantly using materials from the beauty industry, which I use in a completely different way to what they originally intended to be used for, in order to question and pose questions to women and to my audience about how we make the choices we make about our bodies. Maybe even dip your head even more.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to be relaxed.
The way you are against him is lovely.
Just that's nice. Yeah, like you're actually hugging each other. Hello. Now lift your eyes a tiny bit. Yeah.
Yes.
So we can see your eyes. Oh, that's nice. There are many examples of how I've used different materials. One example is that I use false fingernails that are used in the beauty industry, nail tips of varying colours that I put together in an obsessive, neurotic kind of way to form these massive sculptures that resemble scales or skins of snakes. And the reason that I do this is firstly to kind of make these throwaway objects precious, to kind of enshrine the everyday, but also in order to create this armour, which, I often think about the way women dress and the way we present ourselves to the world is like we're almost presenting ourselves to go out and kind of fight the battle of every day. And I think that the makeup we wear, the clothes we wear, the nail polish we wear are all these kind of armour and sort of almost the tools we use to fight this battle. So it's to make these huge sculptures that are both imposing and beautiful. So when you look at them from far away, they're very alluring and attractive. But when you go up close, they're quite abject, and they have a sort of slightly sort of you recoil from them slightly when you realize what they're made of. And I think that again, this is like a metaphor for femininity. Is that it's sort of what people expect from us is this kind of polished, beautiful surface. And then when you go up close and see how kind of messy and complicated it is, it's less attractive. The works do resemble snakes. One of the reasons is that I look at these ideas of how women are portrayed symbolically in myth. And there's Medusa, who her head becomes full of snakes, which in all these myths, every time a woman is punished for being free, for kind of expressing herself, she's punished by becoming made into a monster. And I kind of think that it's still the same when women are very outspoken or kind of try to express themselves. They're often ostracized or kind of vilified for having this freedom. I think there are a couple of things that I'm interested in about the nails. So first of all is the nail industry itself, and the nail salons represent sort of a modern day sort of crafting circle, which is where women used to kind of meet to talk, to share, to kind of collaborate. That now you go to the nail salon in order to kind of talk to your peers and other women. There's also the element of aspiration in it, that when the people who work in the nail salons, it's an opportunity to kind of move up the station in order getting a good job. The beauty industry is a kind of lucrative industry for people to get into now. So there's the aspiration of the people working in the industry, but there's also the idea that wearing nails is aspirational. When you can paint your fingernails, it means you don't use your hands in a certain way that you can wear them, it means that you've reached a certain station. So I'm interested in what the nails symbolize, But I'm also interested in the idea that we are in this kind of throwaway culture where everything means so little and a nail means so little, and yet it kind of symbolizes so much. There are many instances that I work with groups or collaborate with other women. One example is a piece I made many years ago called The Dream, which was about weddings and about how women, so it wasn't about marriage, it was about the wedding itself and the kind of expectation and pressure people feel, or women feel, about having a wedding or needing to have a wedding. So I approached women from, not people I know, but from different walks of life in South Africa, and we engaged in a conversation about what it felt to get married. And this ended up being a piece working with 40 different women on the subject. Another example where I've collaborated with women is I did a series called Vajazzling series, where I put ads in local newspapers, so the Village Voice in New York and a newspaper in a women's magazine in Johannesburg, where I asked them to contact me to be vajazzled. So to be vajazzled is to actually have your pubic region decorated with Swarovski crystals. So they would come to my studio and they would choose whether they wanted, how they wanted to present their bodies, and then we applied one by one these rhinestones to make images. And what the project was looking at is how the choices women make about their bodies, this trend about removing bodily hair, which is actually a trend that's very influenced by the pornography industry. And it was questioning, why do we make these choices? Why do we sort of kind of remove our natural beauty and adorn it with something else? Like, is it for us? Is it for someone else? Like, is it a convention that we don't even know why we're making these decisions? So it was kind of asking women questions, and the actual work was doing it. They ended up being photographs, but it was more kind of private performance that happened with me and the woman and the team that I worked with. And it was about talking and, this kind of very intimate moment between two strangers. And it became a very interesting confessional space. And what was interesting about it is I went in with a very set of ideas about what I thought it was about, and I ended with a very different idea of what it meant to these women to do this. I started from a very critical position, that I felt that like a lot of women were making decisions, uninformed decisions about their bodies, and kind of being swept up in these trends, which are actually kind of the manipulation of a broader industry that kind of preys on a almost sort of vulnerable minority group. But then when I found out, when the woman who came to me, I was so surprised by who came to have themselves vajazzled. So a lot of women, there was one woman, a Muslim woman who came, very religious, who came, didn't want her family to know. So she did it just purely for her. She didn't want anyone to know. She didn't want to show it to anyone. She didn't even really want the photo. She just wanted to do it. And there were women who came because they were very uncomfortable in their bodies, and it was almost like a challenge to themselves to kind of make peace with who they were. And the interesting thing is that this is an older project. Now, this idea of kind of embracing different body shapes and embracing who you are, that wasn't the language at the time. So these women felt very brave coming to do it. I chose to use images like Hello Kitty or, kind of the wave, that Japanese wave that's kind of on every tattoo that you see now. So these are images that have become kind of mainstream throwaway images, because I think that, things like these vajazzling and tattoos and body markings do become about sort of trends and about a moment. It's not a kind of, it's what you feel on the day. So it was almost kind of very quick, responsive drawings, as opposed to very kind of considered, deep thinking things. So they weren't. The first series I did actually said "I do" on all of them. All the women's vajazzle said "I do," which was again this idea about permission and kind of acknowledgement of what they were doing and what they were being part of. You know, like you say I do to getting married, you also say I do to these social contracts that all these companies kind of make with you. I think what I was aiming for initially was to take these photographs and to present them in a way, because the way the photographs were taken is that they were front on, they weren't kind of what you call the male gaze, the body they weren't necessarily iconicized, not nuanced, not sympathetic, hazy light. So it was not the kind of way women are pictured in film or cinema or advertising generally. It was quite a frank eye that was looking at it, and it was really to just say, to ask people to like, look at this. What is this? Why? What does this mean to you? Why are you doing this? But then when we started taking the photographs, you know, they started being very formal photos where they just stood with their hands on their hips, and sort of women started dancing for the camera and sort of swaying their hips and getting into it. And in some ways, you know, I'm cautious with the use of the word empowerment because I think it's thrown around a lot, but this idea of not having a face was quite liberating for them, because it was literally that no one had to know who they were, and they could kind of be free with their bodies. And so it was quite a lesson for me in terms of what this kind of anonymity, this freedom allowed these women, and the idea of becoming a performer, you know, that we're not usually allowed to be. So the intention of the initial idea was very different to what the outcome was for me. The women initially, when they took the photos, we agreed that it was anonymous and no one had to know about it. But when I had the exhibition, it was amazing how many of them actually went and stood next to their pictures and sort of claimed them. So it was an interesting experience, and to see how they also changed their ideas based on seeing these photos, and how all of them were so proud of them actually at the end. No one looked at them and thought, oh my God, I look terrible. And the intention wasn't to romanticize the body. Yeah, maybe it could be the other side. Let's try one more to that one, yeah. Let's see. Look at me. Yeah, like that. That's what you want. Okay. You see, there's more play in the dress now.
Yes, the dress is much better.
Yeah. Okay. Another project that I worked on, which worked with groups, but in a less kind of active way, was that I did a series of pictures about Tinder. I was working in New York at the time, and it was the early days of Tinder, and I was very surprised at how many men, when you went onto their profiles, when you flicked through the first two images, there was a penis, you know, and it made me think about this idea of permission, you know, this idea that these men thought it was fine to kind of give this, it wasn't even give, it was forcing this phallus onto a woman who was sort of perhaps there for other reasons, because at the beginning of Tinder it felt more like now it's, you know, it's about sex, it's quite open and honest, but before it was still in a murky time as to why you were doing this, and I think a lot of women were looking for relationships on Tinder. So it was about the idea of these men kind of forcing themselves on a woman in a different kind of way. So what I did is that I took these dick pics, as they're called, and I redrew them in false eyelashes. And they were named with the name of the person and the distance from me when I found this profile on the internet. And yeah, it was about kind of taking this image that was forced on me and kind of making it mine, and kind of literally putting it from the perspective of the female gaze rather than the male gaze, because it was made from the eyelashes from women, but it was also me saying, well, I haven't given you permission to give me this image, so I'm not asking your permission for me to make it my image. And so that was what that series was about. I chose to work with eyelashes because it's one of the trappings of the beauty industry. It's one of these things that we use to kind of veil and sort of disguise, extend ourselves, and yet sort of when they're kind of taken off the eye and they're kind of cut, they're quite gross. You know, they could be pubic hair, they could be the hair off it, stubble hair. So they become sort of quite thick and kind of like, almost like insectile. So, and yet you could make these very kind of fine throwaway drawings that almost felt like if you glue onto it, it would go. So it was the ephemeral, the ethereal, and yet the kind of abject and sort of kind of realness of these images that women are confronted with. It's interesting to see the reaction with them. I was actually showing the work. I was doing a residency in New York when I did the Tinder pics, and they were censored. Turns out that people are quite happy to have vaginas all over the place, but put an erect penis in a show and it has a very different outcome. I find that with the dick pics, it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. They find it very uncomfortable that an artist such as myself makes them, because I think people have an idea of what kind of people make what kind of works. So I think that they're surprised when they see they come from someone who's quite prim and proper like me. But I think, in fact, they're the pieces that I've had the hardest time showing, actually. In fact, I've made huge drawings of them which no one's ever wanted to show. So I think that is very telling about our time, you know, that people find it very hard to palette such images, and yet women have to deal with them on an everyday basis. All of my work looks at the female body in different kinds of ways. Another piece that is a very different example of the way that I work is a piece that I made called Comfort Her, which was a giant 7.5 meter blanket that was made, that went in a space that kind of almost became a cave-like space. And the blanket was made in a way that it started as a blanket, a crocheted blanket, but then sort of almost kind of morphed or sort of ran into this sort of red, dark, cave-like body space. And you know, one of the things, all the work that I make works with the palettes of the beauty industry. So the colors of lipsticks, the color of blushes, the color of eyeshadows. And I'm interested in how when you start putting these colors together, they start becoming the interior colors of the body, you know, the color of blood, the color of muscle, and sort of these bright pop colors become sort of dark and overwhelming when you put them together. So the blanket was made with these kind of makeup colors, and they became sort of dark holes of the body. And the series of work that I was making was about, from an exhibition called Beneath Her, which was thinking about the idea of holding the image, the idea of being beautiful, and the lengths that women will go to keep themselves beautiful, and the kind of growth of this plastic surgery industry, and how, you know, the kind of the fear we have of getting old. And so the works were about like taking away the surface and looking beneath, and how kind of messy and bloody and complicated all of this is. So it's not kind of slick and shiny. So the works I make always have this kind of dichotomy of these kind of slick surfaces and these dark undercurrents. So, which I think is a metaphor for the world we live in, is that we spend so much time trying to make everything look perfect, and yet everything is sort of so complicated and rotten and messy underneath. And I think that that's what that work was about. I think a lot of the reading I've done talks about how these kind of consumer giants prey on minority groups who come from a place of feeling inferior and feeling that they have to prove a lot. And I make work about being a woman because that's my point of reference, and that's the place that I find myself. And you know, I think being a woman is really tough. Even if you're privileged and having, making money, I don't think, men realize how the pressure on women to be beautiful, to kind of present themselves in a certain way, not to be too emotional, not to be too weak but kind, generous, sexy, not too sexy, but, and the kind of boundaries that are always crossed on an everyday basis that women experience. And I don't know any woman who hasn't had one of these experiences, like a Me Too experience or a kind of place where they felt vulnerable or kind of compromised. And that is why I make the work I make. Whether, so you would say that I see myself as a warrior. I suppose I see myself as, I feel like we're all in this kind of fight in life. I mean, I think there are lots of them, not just this one, but this is the one I'm interested in. And I think that the work I make is an attempt to talk about it, but I'm very clear in terms of the work I make. I don't just want to talk to an art audience. I want the woman in the nail salon to be talking about the work I make, or the woman kind of going and putting their wedding dresses on, talking about this work. So I try very hard to make work that talks to a broader audience, that appeals to a broader audience, which is one of the reasons that I use the kind of visual language that I use, and the materials that I use. But I hope that the work I make does start a conversation, does make someone think twice about why they make the decisions they make. And I think that I'm part of the system. I'm completely seduced by the system myself. I don't claim to be above it. And I think that as I'm kind of captive to this system, that's the reason that I want to make the work I make. And what if you're both just sitting back, like you're sitting next to each other, you actually don't want to talk to each other? That's nice.
I like that.
One of the works that I think really exemplifies my practice is a piece that I have made called Spit Swallow, which is a neon, and it's a self-portrait, an outline of my profile, and there's a kind of it could be sperm, it could be a thought, or it could be spit that's coming out of the mouth, and then it flashes to being sort of swallowed. And I always think about this work as it almost epitomizes what I'm talking about, because as a woman you have this decision of like, do you just swallow everything that's given to you? Do you just sit quietly and accept your place and sort of just say, well, this is how it is? Or do you choose to kind of be vocal and outspoken and kind of challenge the status quo? So, even though there is a double entendre with the piece that actually is, it sort of refers to fellatio, and a woman, is she someone who swallows or spits? It's kind of very sexual, which is again also talking about the different kinds of woman people want us to be. Like you're wanted to be kind of prim and proper, but they also want you to kind of be a bit dirty. And I think that this piece talks about this kind of this doubleness that we're confronted with all the time. And interestingly, it's also a piece that can sometimes make people a bit uncomfortable. The work does reference these red light districts and the kind of selling sex, which is also, links to the other works I do about the kind of advertising industry, selling sex. Like the reason we wear kind of sexy, blushy lipsticks is to kind of make our lips more kissable, kind of more appealing. It's all, I read a book that talked about how, love and sex are kind of necessary for the wheels of capitalism to work, because we need to always want more, to need more. And this idea of kind of needing to be loved and needing to be desired as kind of essential parts of being successful in life are kind of something that preys upon, it's a good way to prey upon women. So I think that these kind of ideas are sort of implicit in the work.
Okay, light.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Okay, I'm going to do that again. 1, 2, 3, light.
Yeah, let me just get this one shoe out of it. Like I wanted, like, yeah. So they read as separate shoes, you see.
Are we going to go one more time? 1, 2, 3.
I make works with many different materials. I'm very set on the idea that I don't want to just make work from one thing for the rest of my life. I want to continually explore different medias. I make paintings. I call them paintings from sequins or paillettes that you use for dressmaking or dance dresses. And the images, I ask women that I know to pose for me. We actually set up kind of shoots, like almost like film shoots, and we kind of act out scenes from films or kind of iconic images of women being presented in certain ways. And they get asked to sort of act out the diva or the victim or these archetypal characters. And then I take the photos and I translate them into sequins, and then we hand stitch the sequins into these huge paintings, sometimes up to 2 meters in size. And what I love about the sequins is that the reflective nature, the image never holds. You know, from when you go from one side to the other side, it's a different image. Sometimes you see one detail, sometimes you see nothing, sometimes you can see everything. And what I think about these pieces, that it's a metaphor for the idea of being a woman. There's no one idea of what a woman is. You know, it's this kind of constantly changing idea, which is projected onto us. You know, we want it to be people want us to be so many different things: the mother, the seductress, the kind of tempter, the good girl, and yet we also have these kind of pressures upon ourselves to kind of be these different things. And it's this kind of unattainable mirage, which is what I see these pieces as being.